Hi guys, and welcome to another video. Now if you're a subscriber, then you'll probably wonder what's going off, as you've probably seen the thumbnail and the title. Now obviously it's not the normal type of content, it's not anything Ford related, but as it's a family member's car, I decided to do these for it. Now I wasn't originally going to film it, so that's why you'll probably see it's a mixture of photos and clips and me talking over the top. I had a quick look and I couldn't see anything online related to this, so I thought it might help anyone that is in general just looking for a video on how to do these. So in which case you're probably watching this video wanting to know how to do front brakes for Renault Captur. So hopefully this gives you a bit of insight on how to do them. So I hope you enjoy this video. I hope it gives you a little bit of insight on how to do front brakes for Renault. So I hope it's some use. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is loosen the wheel nuts but not remove them completely, and jack up the car. And don't forget to put the axle stand underneath, as you don't just want to rely on a trolley jack or even worse, a scissor jack. Once it's secure, then go ahead and remove the wheel. So once it's off, a good practice is to put the wheel under the car. This is so that if anything gives way and the car falls, then it's an extra item to stop the car from falling and potentially stop it landing on you. It also comes into play with the caliper later on, as you'll see. So once the wheel's off, you'll then see the disc and caliper, as you can see in the photo. Now within the centre of the disc itself, you'll see two torque bit screws. So first you just want to loosen these off, and you don't need to remove them just yet. At the back of the caliper, as you can see, there's two retaining bolts which have covers on. So these just pop off. You can use a screwdriver just for these, and inside will be two larger torque bolts. Okay, so there's one at the top and one at the bottom. So if you undo these, you don't need to completely remove them, just undo them so you can see the bolt just in the centre there has come out the thread. So then you need to remove the spring retaining clip for the calipers. Now these can be an absolute pain and, to be fair, a little bit dangerous. So always make sure that you've got a pair of pliers on them to stop them springing off. So these can travel a fair distance, or even worse, spring off and catch you in the eye. So always good to keep a good grip on them. So all you want to do is use a screwdriver in one hand and a pair of pliers in the others, and just gently try and lift up the clip from where it goes into the caliper. And the caliper should just gently wiggle off. So with the alloy under the car and half just behind the wheel, you can now just rest the caliper on the wheel, and the front pad will just remove quite easily, like so. The rear caliper is held on with 3 clips. This just gently pulls out. Now the pads weren't that bad on this car, but the discs are pretty naff, so as we bought both, it's a good idea to change them anyway. So next is the carrier. This is held on by 2 nuts, and it's usually a bit of a pain to get out, so always best just to give it a squirt of WD-40 just to help things move along. As you can see from the photo, 2 bolts top and bottom. And so these are normally quite stuck on, so you might have to give them a bit of a whack. So eventually they'll come loose and you should be able to remove them quite easily. So it's always best just to loosen one first, undo it a little bit and then work on the other. So you're undoing them both roughly at the same time. Makes it a little bit easier and keeps the bolts more straight as you try to undo them. So after that you can then go ahead and remove the torque screws that we did in the beginning. And these are the last screws to hold the disc on. Sometimes the disc may come off pretty easy. In this case it was seized on pretty well. So a bit of WD-40 and a bit of a whack helps it to come off eventually. If it's well and truly seized on, then you may use a bigger hammer. But as you can see, eventually it was removed and you're left with the hub. So it's always a good idea to give it a good sun down. This gets rid of any rust that may have caused the disc to seize onto the hub. Also, you can do these two sections where the carrier sits onto the hub. These sometimes get coated in bits of oily grease and bits that stick in there, so you want to make sure it fits quite snug and flush. So it's always a good idea to get a bit of copper grease, not too much. Just put some on the hub there. This will stop the disc from seizing in the future. So I forgot to record this bit, but once that's done, you can take the new disc out of its box and its wrapper if it's in one. So the new disc will come with what looks like a bit of oil on it, which stops it from rusting. This obviously needs to come off before it goes onto the car. So if you've got some D40 handy, just spray some of that or some brake cleaner on it, and give it a good wipe. It should come off quite easily. So once you've done this, try to avoid touching the disc with oily hands or copper grease. And then you can put the disc on and put the two torque retaining screws back in. Now the next thing you want to do is, if you go into the engine bay and find where the brake reservoir is, and take the cap off. Brake fluid is quite corrosive, so you don't want it dripping anywhere into the engine, so it's always good to put a cloth around there. So when you do push the pistons back, this level will slowly increase, and obviously you don't want it dripping everywhere. So the microfiber will soak in any of that fluid. So that's the piston that we need to push back. So you can get a piston pushback tool, but in most cases I've never needed one. I have a little hack, in which case I use a G-clamp, as you'll see, and all I do with that is just fit it on like so, and keep turning, and you'll see the piston gradually push itself back into the caliper. Now I don't want to do it too quick, just keep a slow pace. So while you're doing this, just keep an eye on the brake fluid level. Make sure it's not overspilling onto your microfiber. If it is already, then you might need to get a turkey baster or something just to remove a bit. As you can see now, that's pushed in. You can see that the fluid's okay, so we'll carry on. So with all that done, next you want to put the carrier back on. So make sure you get the carrier the right way around, and then you can just put each bolt in just to hold it in place. So as we took them out, tighten them up in the same way that we remove them. Do one and the other, don't fully tighten one and then put the other screw in. Makes it much more easier doing it this way. Makes it line up properly as well. So once these are screwed in, give them a good yank on them, make sure they're tight. As you can see, there's the clip on the brake pad. You need to make sure you get the right one with those on, and this just simply pushes in back into the caliper. So while you're pushing this back in, try to avoid getting any oil or grease onto the brake pad. Next, what you want to do is just put a little bit of copper grease onto the carrier. This will make sure that the brake disc doesn't seize in place and keep it moving freely. Because if it sticks in place, then you're going to have issues with them sticking on, and potentially it will wear your brake disc down a lot quicker. And it just slides in just like so. So with this done, you should be able to then push the caliper over the brake pad. If you can't, and it's not wide enough, you may need to go back with a G-clamp and just try and push it in some more, like what I had to do. Not too much, just so it allows the caliper to slide over the brake disc. Okay, so when you think it's in place, if you go back to the torque retaining bolts that that were covered under the caps, you can then go ahead and tighten both of those up. Make sure you get them in place, otherwise they won't tighten up and they won't connect the caliper to the carrier. You can see if they're going in or not by looking through the carrier, as we saw earlier, making sure that they go through into the thread. So once tight, you can go ahead and put the caps back in. These are dust retaining caps, so it's always good not to lose these as well. So with these in place, you may be able to wiggle the caliper a little bit, but nothing really major. So with that done, you can then take the spring clip. Now this is probably the hardest part of doing the brakes, trying to get this one back in. Now the way I found is if you start at the top, and push the spring into one side. And the idea then is to try and push the spring in the middle, which will then which as you can see, will push the spring back in. So it is a bit of a pain. It's always a good idea as well to give it a bit of a tap to make sure they're in place, as you don't want this clip flying off anywhere. So once it's in place, it should look as it looks like this. And that's it. That's one side done. And you can do the same to the next side. So once complete, it's always a good idea as well to check the wheel and alloy once you've got it off. Make sure there's no rips, tears or cracks anywhere, and then put the tyre back on. So when you have done both sides, obviously be aware that you do have new brakes on. There's different ways people suggest, but I always say don't do any heavy braking for about 100 mile. It's always been fine for when I've done brakes. If you happen to jump on them, you may not stop, or you do risk warping the disc, causing a few issues maybe. But that's the way I've done it, and it's always worked. When you've done say 50 mile or so, don't forget to check the wheel nuts, make sure they're still tight. Make sure as well that when you've done a few miles to check the disc, make sure that all the disc is being used for braking. If it's just using the top or just the bottom, then it may mean that the pad's not seated correctly. So I hope this video has been useful. If you like what you saw, then don't forget to give it a thumbs up, or even subscribe if you want to see more. And I'll see you in the next video.